August 21st, 1968. The sound of tanks rolling through cobblestone streets shatters the pre-dawn quiet of Prague. Joseph Kudelka, a 30-year-old Czech photographer, grabs his camera and rushes outside. The images he captures over the next 7 days will become iconic symbols of resistance against Soviet oppression. Fast forward to February 24th, 2022. Air raid sirens wail across Kiev as Russian missiles streak through the morning sky. Journalist Misla Chernov documents the opening hours of an invasion that many said couldn't happen in 21st century Europe. 2 invasions, 2 moments when Moscow's tanks crossed sovereign borders. Separated by more than 5 decades, the Soviet-led invasion of Czechoslovakia and Russia's war on Ukraine reveal striking parallels and crucial differences in how authoritarian powers assert control over their neighbors. In both conflicts, Moscow deployed a rapid decapitation strategy, aiming to topple governments they viewed as threats. In 1968, Soviet paratroopers seized Prague's Ruzhnya airport in the opening hours, flying in special forces to capture key government buildings. Their mission: arrest Alexander Dubček and other reformist leaders of the Prague Spring movement, whose democratic reforms threatened Soviet control. Similarly, Russia's 2022 plan centered on quickly seizing Hostomel Airport near Kiev, with elite paratroopers, creating an air bridge for reinforcements that would capture government buildings and eliminate President Zelensky. In the words of a captured Russian document, they sought a psychological breakdown of the Ukrainian leadership and military. The numbers tell part of the story. For Czechoslovakia, the Warsaw Pact mobilized up to 400,000 troops with 6,300 tanks. Russia initially deployed 190,000 troops with approximately 1,200 tanks against Ukraine. Both invasions were meant to be overwhelming shows of force that would collapse resistance before it began. Colonel General Andrei Melukov, who participated in the Czechoslovakian invasion as a young officer, later wrote in his memoirs, "We expected potential resistance, but found something different. Ordinary citizens standing in front of our tanks with bare hands and tears in their eyes, asking simply, why?" The Czechoslovakian military never mobilized, following President Ludvík Svoboda's order to stand down to prevent bloodshed. Instead, civilians engaged in remarkable passive resistance, turning street signs around, removing house numbers, and refusing to direct Soviet troops. Vera Chaslavska, Czechoslovakia's Olympic gymnastics champion, silently protested during the 1968 Olympics medal ceremony just days after the invasion by turning her head away during the Soviet anthem. This subtle act of defiance cost her years of her career, but inspired millions. Ukraine's response couldn't have been more different. When Russian Colonel Yuri Medvedev led his tank column toward Kiev, Ukrainian soldier Vitaly Skakun sacrificed his life to blow up a bridge, delaying the Russian advance. Ukrainian military and civilians alike took up arms. President Zelensky, when offered evacuation, famously responded, "I need ammunition, not a ride." What Moscow expected to be a 3-day operation in Ukraine has stretched into years of grinding warfare with casualties in the tens of thousands. A stark contrast to the 137 Czechoslovakian deaths in 1968. The international responses to these invasions reflect changing global dynamics. When Soviet tanks rolled into Prague, the West offered strong words but little action. UN Security Council condemnation was vetoed by the USSR. President Johnson, mired in Vietnam in the Cold War nuclear standoff, limited his response to diplomatic protests. By contrast, Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered unprecedented sanctions, massive military aid packages, and a reinvigorated NATO. Countries that had once been victims of Soviet aggression led the charge: Poland, the Baltic states, and yes, the Czech Republic itself. Miloš Vystrčil, president of the Czech Senate, emphasized this historical thread. "We remember 1968. That is why we stand with Ukraine today. History has taught us the cost of freedom and the price of inaction." Behind the geopolitical maneuvering lie personal tragedies. After the Prague invasion, an estimated 300,000 Czechoslovakians fled their homeland. Among them was director Milos Forman, who later won Oscars for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus. Writer Milan Kundera's exile produced The Unbearable Lightness of Being a novel partially set during the Soviet occupation. Jan Palach, a 20-year-old student, set himself on fire in Prague's Wenceslas Square in January 1969 to protest the continued occupation. His funeral became a massive demonstration against Soviet control. In Ukraine, the human toll has been staggering. Millions displaced, thousands of civilians killed, cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut reduced to rubble. Irina Dovhan, a 52-year-old Ukrainian woman, became the face of civilian suffering when photographed, tied to a pole, and beaten by Russian-backed separatists, her face wrapped in the Ukrainian flag. Operation Danube in 1968 succeeded in reinstating authoritarian rule in Czechoslovakia for another 2 decades. The normalization period that followed crushed Czech and Slovak civil society until the Velvet Revolution finally brought freedom in 1989. Ukraine's future remains unwritten, but its resistance has already reshaped European security architecture. Finland and Sweden abandoned decades of neutrality to join NATO. German foreign policy underwent what Chancellor Scholz called a Zeitenwende, a historic turning point, as defense spending increased dramatically. Perhaps the most profound difference between these conflicts lies in their aftermath. The crushing of the Prague Spring created a generation of Czechoslovakians who learned that resistance was futile. Ukraine's fierce defense has taught a different lesson, that determined resistance with international support can thwart even a nuclear-armed neighbor's ambitions. As Czech historian Misla Chernov wrote, after living through the Soviet occupation, freedom is never given, it must always be taken. More than 5 decades later, Ukrainians fight to prove him right, conscious that their struggle echoes through history, from the streets of Prague to the battlefields of Donbass. The tanks may look different now, but the fundamental struggle remains the same, the right of peoples to determine their own future, free from the shadow of empire.